The morning air bit at Richard's lungs as he stepped out of the automatic hospital doors with Samuel steadying his elbow. The sky was a flat winter gray, the kind that made even healthy men feel a little older. Richard felt his wallet sitting too light in his pocket and the spot on his wrist where a plastic ID band had been cut away. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell, so every new story reaches you right away, and we can share these unforgettable moments together. He had been unhooked from machines, but the weight of what had been done to him still clung like a second gown. He kept seeing that empty visitor's chair. He kept hearing the promise, "I'll stay, Dad." He kept remembering the way his son's shoes barely made a sound when he left. "Let's get coffee," Samuel said, guiding him toward the curb. "You'll think clearer with heat in your hands." At the corner diner, the windows breathed fog with every exhale of the room. The waitress refilled cups like a metronome. Richard stared at the sugar packets stacked in their chrome tray. He folded one edge back and forth until the paper split and fine white crystals spilled like a small, beautiful accident. "I'm not going to yell," he said finally. "Yelling won't change anything. I'm going to move quietly." Samuel's eyes warmed. "Quiet is a blade when a man knows how to use it." "I gave him everything," Richard said. "Too much and too easily. I can't change yesterday, but I can make tomorrow harder to steal." He started with small calls that no one would notice. The bank, where a soft-voiced rep confirmed that transfers had been made without a second signature. The credit card company, where the friendly man apologized for the concierge service upgrades that had been added. The old union office, because a man's old job is a mirror that tells him who he used to be and what he forgot to bring forward. By lunch, Richard had a notebook page filled with dates and amounts. The figures looked like the tracks of a fox across new snow, light, quick, and going in one direction only. He used a second page for names. Linda Chun, the independent advisor who had once given a free talk at the senior center about scams that start with a smile. Pastor Daniel, because visibility is part of safety. Mrs. Klein next door, who kept her blinds cracked and heard things she never repeated, unless someone needed protecting. Ruth, the night nurse who had seen the chair beside his bed sit empty, and whose voice was the kind that could carry truth without shouting. "Call Linda first," Samuel said, tapping the name. "She'll tell you what tools exist that men like us never learned. After that, tell your story to someone who isn't family. When darkness stands in a room, it hates a window." Linda Chan met them at a small credit union where the pens were attached to chains and the tellers smiled like cousins. She wore a navy sweater and spoke like a math teacher who still believed you could learn it. "You don't have to sign away your life to be loved," she said. "You don't have to be cruel to be safe. You just have to build a fence that swings open for the right reasons." She drew boxes on paper and labeled them with simple words. A living trust that stayed revocable so control remained where it belonged. A co-trustee who wasn't family, because temptation needs chaperones. Pay-on-death designations that bypassed the grabby middle. A durable power of attorney that sprang only if a doctor's letter said it must, not because a child waved a form in a scared man's face. She spoke of conditions like doorways. If a son showed up, if a son kept showing up, if a son learned, then doors opened one by one. If not, the hallway led elsewhere, veterans housing, scholarships in Margaret Miller's name, a bench at the park where she used to feed ducks. "People say, 'I trust my children,'" Linda said, pressing her pen to the paper. "But trust without boundaries is just a path without a railing." Richard sat very straight as he signed new documents with a careful hand. On one, he wrote the full name that had lived on his birth certificate and marriage license and mortgage papers, Richard Allen Miller. On another, he paused at the beneficiary line and added his son's full name too, John Michael Miller. He looked at the letters a long time. "He's always been John to the world," he said quietly. "But we called him Michael in the house. His mother started that. Said he had an old soul and needed a soft name. Maybe that's why I've been so mixed up about this. I've been talking to two boys. John, who knows how to sign forms. Michael, who used to fall asleep on my chest after Sunday dinners." Linda nodded as if he had given her a map. "Write both names down," she said. "Not just here. Inside your plan. Decide which one the doors are for. and then decide what he must do to find those doors. They built a test that didn't announce itself like a trap. A small account with $5,000 placed where only one type of spending would be permitted: grocery receipts for his father, pharmacy copays, gas to drive to doctor appointments. Anything else would trigger a text to the co-trustee and lock the card like a door closing quietly in the night. They linked the card to an app even a stubborn man could read. Green dots for good, red dots for wrong. "It isn't about punishing him," Richard said to Samuel as they ate chicken soup in Linda's break room. "It's about giving him an honest mirror." "It's both," Samuel replied, and then smiled without apology. "Sometimes mirrors punish." Richard told Pastor Daniel what needed telling. He did not use ugly adjectives. He did not exaggerate. He said, "My son left me in the hospital, and I have moved my savings so no one can take them without earning the right to touch them." The pastor put a hand on his shoulder and said the church basement was open for family meetings, and that the coffee urn would be cleaned for something more serious than small talk. He said a man who protects his house is not unloving. Mrs. Klein listened at the kitchen table with a dish towel twisted in her hands. "I saw him," she said softly, "late, coming by for the mail. He moved like he was making sure the porch light didn't know him. If you need me to say it, I'll say it." Ruth arrived on her own evening, coat smelling like the outdoors. She didn't like meetings. She liked facts. She spoke 2 sentences and left Richard with a folded piece of paper where she had written dates and times and a note that said, "I never saw his coat on the chair after 10 p.m. The note felt heavier than the paper should allow. It was proof, the kind that no father wants and every father needs when his heart argues with his head. Days stacked, neat as playing cards. Richard moved through them like a man who finally remembered the order of a song. He kept his voice soft when he called his son. "Let's sit down," he said. "Bring that folder you keep mentioning. We'll do it right." 2 nights later, his son arrived. He wore a jacket that looked expensive the way a porch looks new after rain. He stood in the doorway like a man who wasn't sure if the house would bite. "Dad," he said, stepping in. "You look strong." "I'm getting there." They ate store rotisserie chicken and deli coleslaw because the point was not the meal. The point was the way a man holds his fork when he's thinking about other things. The folder sat thick on the table, and when his son pushed it across, Richard touched only the edge. "I have my own folder now," Richard said. "A woman named Linda helped me build it. It has what I need. But I made something for you too." He slid a smaller envelope across. Inside was the card from the small account and a single page that explained the rules in plain words without legal flourishes. Grocery, gas, pharmacy, Dad. Green means go. Red means stop. And one last line that said, "At the end of each week, we look at the dots together and decide what the next week looks like." His son looked confused, then relieved, then offended. He laughed once, a thin sound. "You don't trust me to help with the big stuff? But you'll let me buy bananas?" "I trust you with exactly what you can carry without dropping," Richard said. "If you want more, carry this well. There's dignity in starting with a bag of groceries." "That's insulting." "It's a door," Richard said. "You can walk through or not. But don't pretend there isn't a house on the other side." For a week, dots appeared green. Milk, bread, a copay at the pharmacy, gas on a Friday morning before a checkup. His son texted photos of receipts without being asked. Richard felt his chest warm with a dangerous hope. On the 8th day, a red dot bloomed. The transaction description did not bother with euphemism. Bottle service, Aurora Lounge. The amount was the exact heft of 1 month of prescriptions. Richard stared at the screen until the numbers went fuzzy. He didn't call. He locked the card with a soft tap and sat very still while the room settled around him. The phone buzzed. The message said, "Small mistake, chill." He set the phone face down and made tea, the kind his wife liked when she wanted his hands to stop trembling. After the tea came a knock. He opened the door to a son with a speech ready. "It's just once," the young man said. "You don't have to be dramatic. I've been doing all the chores, haven't I?" "Which chores?" Richard asked gently. This time there was no speech, only a flinch. Richard did not scold. He did not slam. He slid the folded card rules back across the doorway as if returning a borrowed book. "We'll try again in a month," he said. "If you want to." The response was anger, because anger is how shame keeps its spine. The door closed while words were still being thrown. Richard stood in the silence afterward and felt not triumphant, not even safe. He felt old and very awake. The next morning he called Pastor Daniel and said the basement might be necessary sooner than planned. The pastor said Wednesday was open. "If you are listening and your stomach is tight because you know this room, breathe with me. You are not being cruel for building walls that hold. You are not unloving for asking for proof where there has been forgetting. Tell your story in the comments so another man or woman hears your footsteps and knows they're not walking in circles. And subscribe because we're building a small town here, one where stories are maps and every map is a light." They did not call it an intervention. They called it coffee after choir practice, even though no one sang. The folding chairs clicked, and someone tightened the urn spigot with a pocket knife. Samuel arrived first and leaned his cane against the wall. Mrs. Klein wore a sweater with tiny pearls that made her look like the kind of witness the world listens to. Ruth stood near the door as if she might leave at any moment, but her eyes were steady. Pastor Daniel set a plate of store cookies in the middle as if sugar could soften syllables. When his son walked in and saw the circle, his face shuddered. "What is this?" he said, although everyone could see he knew. "This is a room where truth fits," Richard said. "Sit." They began with small truths because big ones break when thrown against cold air. Ruth said she never saw his coat on the chair after 10. Mrs. Klein said she saw him take mail and go. Samuel said he had believed a different boy was in this body once and wondered where that boy had gone. The pastor talked about honor like it was a word that could have a modern shape if men chose it. No one raised a voice. No one used the language of movies. When it was Richard's turn, he slid the page from Linda across the table. It listed the trust, the co-trustee, the springing power of attorney, the pay-on-death designations, the conditions written like doors with hinges that creak and still work. "These are the rails," he said. "They're not punishments. They're the structure that keeps me from falling into the old habit of trusting without looking. If you want to be part of this, you can. But you'll walk where the floor holds." His son snorted. "You had to drag strangers in to embarrass me?" "I had to bring witnesses," Richard said. "That's how a man stops a story from moving the wrong way. Money went to a place it shouldn't. Care didn't go to the place it should. I will not argue with you alone in a kitchen where truth can be edited. So what, I'm cut off? That's your revenge? Give it to a charity instead of your own blood. If you do nothing different," Richard said, "then yes, most of it goes to people who will put roofs over veterans and books in the hands of kids with your mother's name inside. But if you choose differently, if you show up, if you keep showing up, if we sit with a counselor 12 times and you bring receipts for a year and you sign a simple budget with me every month, then the door's open. Not because you made me feel something, because you did something. It's not revenge. It's a map. That's manipulative. It's accountable," Samuel said quietly. "A word men forget when they want money to feel like love." The room held still. The young man looked from face to face, as if trying to find the one that would let him back out into the alley of excuses. He found none. He left fast, the way a man leaves when the room isn't the one he trained in. Winter leaned into town. Richard learned to like the rhythm of his own kettle again. He started walking at the mall each morning before the stores opened because retired men and women know that hallways can be a kind of therapy. He kept his phone volume on high and answered every call, even the ones that started with silence and ended with, "I'm fine, Dad." He answered them by saying, "The doors are still there." He did not move them closer. He did not move them farther away. One afternoon, a month later, he was shelving groceries when the phone buzzed with a text that only said, "Are you home?" He typed yes and left the door unlocked because dignity works both ways. His son stood on the porch with hands inside his jacket and eyes that had slept little. He didn't step inside at first. He looked at the living room like it had become a museum exhibit about a species he used to be. "I lost my job," he said, voice low. "I'll say it before you ask. They cut people and I was standing where the cut passed. I can pretend the blade didn't choose me for a reason, but that wouldn't be honest. Sit, Richard said, pointing to the same chair that had seen papers and rotisserie chicken. Not to negotiate, to rest. I took money I shouldn't have, the young man said into his hands. I took your trust, which is worse. And when I saw that red dot, I told myself a story about how small it was. I've been telling myself small stories for a long time. We're all good at those, Richard said. Tell me a big one. The young man breathed like a man about to put his head under water. I will show up, not for the reading of a will, for the changing of my posture. I'll go to the meetings. I'll keep the receipts. I'll sit with you once a week and open the app and not flinch. I'll take the card when you unlock it and pretend it's heavier than it looks because of what it signifies. I won't unlock it yet, Richard said. But we can start another thing. There's a pantry at the church that needs someone to lift boxes and carry bags to cars. We'll go together twice a week for a month. Not as a punishment, as a way to remember which direction food is meant to move. They went on Tuesday. They went on Thursday. They learned the names of a woman who always wore a pink scarf and a boy who whispered thank you so softly it felt like a prayer. They learned that hands learn quickly how to pass weight in a way that doesn't bruise. In the second week, the young man brought a spiral notebook. He wrote dates and hours. He stapled receipts for gas not to be reimbursed but because a paper trail is a bridge you can walk back across if you forget where you're going. In the third week, they sat at a folding table with a counselor who looked like nobody's idea of a Hollywood therapist and exactly like the person you want in a room full of hard truths. She said the word boundaries until it sounded more like comfort than fence. She asked the son what money felt like when he was 6 and what it felt like when he was 26 and what it felt like when he saw a bottle sparkler above a table he couldn't afford. He said it felt like worth. She said, then we're going to teach your brain a different definition. If you are still with me and the room you are sitting in has gotten quieter, it's because hope is a soft animal that sneaks in without knocking. If you have a story where a door stayed shut too long, write it below. If a door opened and you walk through it and your family learned to walk too, write that. Someone needs to see a green dot today. And if these stories keep you company in the lonely rooms, hit subscribe so you don't have to remember when to come back. We'll find you. Spring came the way it always does, by showing up at the edges first. Richard's doctor cleared him to hike the small loop behind the library. He stopped halfway to catch breath and realized he wasn't the only one who had learned pacing. At 6 months, they unlocked a new door. The groceries card returned with a limit smaller than a dinner bill at the Aurora Lounge and bigger than pride. The dots turned green and stayed there, almost shyly at first. The son sent selfies in the pharmacy aisle like a teenager proving he was where he said he'd be. They laughed at themselves, which is the sound that repairs old beams. At 9 months, Linda sat with them at the credit union again. She didn't change the trust. She didn't promise the house. She pointed at a paragraph that said, if consistency is demonstrated for 12 months and counseling completed and debts addressed in good faith, then distributions may begin at a rate that feels like stewardship, not a jackpot. She asked the son to read it out loud. He did. His voice shook on stewardship. She said, that will be our word. Mom would like that word, he said. She chose it for us, Richard replied, touching the bench drawing that would soon carry her name, the one by the pond in the park where the geese pretended to be dignified. On Thanksgiving, Pastor Daniel insisted on pie before paperwork. The church basement smelled like cinnamon and floor polish. People hugged like they meant it. After the coffee was poured, Richard asked for a minute. He didn't read from a sheet. He spoke the way a man speaks when a thing has passed through him and not around him. I was left in a hospital, he said. I built a wall of money without a gate and then handed the key to a boy who didn't know what walls are for. I learned to put in gates with locks that open for work and for love and for time. I learned that boundaries are how love keeps its shape. My son learned that shame is terrible at budgeting and good at lying. He learned receipts can be holy. The room laughed softly, and then quieted. We're not finished, he said. We are never finished. But we are no longer pretending that finishing is the point. The point is walking in the right direction with witnesses. He looked at his son, who raised his paper cup like a vow. It wasn't a happy ending gesture. It was a we're not going back signal, which is better. If you're hearing this and your chest hurts because a chair sat empty beside your bed once, hear me. Your money is a shield, not a leash. Do not give away the shield and call it love. Build the trust. Choose a co-trustee. Write springing powers that require letters. Attach receipts to the weeks like buttons that keep a jacket closed against wind. And tell someone who will stand in a room with you when the air gets heavy. You deserve that room. You deserve rails that hold. You deserve a story that teaches without needing to break you first. When the first distribution came a year later, it wasn't to a son. It was to the bench. They went to the park in jackets and carried a little bag of birdseed because Margaret would have insisted. The plaque read, "Sit, breathe, steward what was given." A man pushing a stroller paused to read it aloud. His wife repeated the word steward and smiled like she was writing a note to herself. "Mom would have loved this," the young man said, brushing a speck of pollen from the metal. "She's why we can," Richard answered. "Because she knew the difference between giving and collapsing. I'm learning it late. You're learning it now. That's a good order." They sat. They didn't speak for a while because sometimes men don't. A goose made a sound that was somehow both rude and elegant. They laughed like people who had earned the right to. When they stood to go, the young man said something that turned the air crisp with rightness. "I'm ready to be John again," he said. "Not the name you apologized for, the one you trusted to sign. I'll keep Michael in the house for Sundays. But when I walk into banks and basements and rooms where the work happens, I'll be John." "Then sign here," Richard said, pulling a pen like a magic trick. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a trust. It was a simple promise between a father and a son that said, "I will keep showing up even when the dots go red because dots can change back." They both signed. The ink shone a little before it dried. If this felt like your story, even in pieces, tell us the pieces in the comments. Someone else is standing in a kitchen tonight with a folder they don't understand and a heart that thinks loving means opening every door. Give them your map. And subscribe so when we tell the next true story. Another betrayal that becomes a boundary, another lesson that becomes a life. We can learn it together, slowly, with witnesses. Richard left the hospital with Samuel at his side, the autumn wind cutting across their faces. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from age alone, but from betrayal that weighed like iron chains around his chest. "Michael thinks I'm helpless," Richard muttered as they reached Samuel's old pickup truck. "But I'm not. I still have my mind. I still have fight in me." Samuel adjusted his cane and gave Richard a sharp look. "Good, because if you want your dignity back, you can't sit idle. You need to turn his greed into his downfall. But you must be careful. Sons like Michael, they know how to play innocent to the world. No one believes fathers when they say their children have betrayed them. Everyone says, 'You must have misunderstood. He's family. He loves you.' No one sees the wolf until it's too late." Richard clenched his jaw. "Then we'll make them see." They drove in silence for a while, the sound of the engine filling the space where broken trust lingered. Finally, Samuel spoke again. "First step, Richard, information. You can't fight what you don't understand. We need to know exactly where your money went." Richard nodded. The bank, the lawyer, his son's accounts. Every trail had to be followed. The very next day, Richard put on his best jacket, the one he hadn't worn since his wife's funeral, and walked into the bank. He carried himself with quiet dignity, even though his hands trembled as he held his cane. At the counter, the young teller smiled politely. "How can I help you today, sir?" "I'd like to check some recent transfers from my retirement account," Richard said firmly. "I authorized my son to manage it, but I'd like to confirm the details myself." The teller tapped away at the keyboard. Her expression flickered for just a moment before returning to neutral. "Yes, I see here several large transfers made over the past 3 months. One was to a luxury car dealership, another to a real estate company, and," she paused, lowering her voice, "a payment to an exclusive country club. All under your son's authorization." Richard's stomach churned. He thanked her quietly and walked out, every step heavier than the one before. Samuel was waiting by the truck. "Well?" Samuel asked. Richard swallowed hard. He spent it. Not on my hospital bills. Not on family needs. On himself. Cars, clubs, apartments. My lifetime of work, gone. Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line. That's not just selfishness. That's theft. And theft leaves trails. That evening, they sat at Samuel's dining table. Papers spread everywhere. Old receipts, bank printouts, letters, even photos Samuel had insisted on taking whenever they saw Michael flaunting his new lifestyle. Samuel's eyes gleamed with determination. You see, Richard, betrayal doesn't end with hurt feelings. It always leaves evidence. He thinks he's smart, but greed makes people sloppy. And you, my friend, will use that. Richard looked at the papers. But even if I have proof, what then? He's still my son. Samuel leaned forward. And what are you to him? A wallet. A stepping stone. If you don't stand up, he'll bleed you dry until there's nothing left. And he'll move on without a second thought. Fathers like us don't just fight for money. We fight for respect, for dignity, for every old man sitting in a lonely apartment because his children forgot him. Richard's throat tightened, but he nodded. Samuel was right. This wasn't just about him. It was about every father who gave too much and asked for too little. The plan took shape. First, Richard quietly contacted an attorney. Not a big-name lawyer Michael could manipulate, but an old friend of Samuel's, a retired attorney named Ellen who still had fire in her spirit. She invited them into her modest office, walls lined with law books and old photos of cases won. Richard explained everything, every painful detail. Ellen listened carefully, her eyes narrowing with each word. This isn't just betrayal, she said finally. It's financial abuse of the elderly. Courts take that seriously, especially if we can show he manipulated you. Do you have documentation? Richard handed over the bank records. Ellen flipped through them, her expression grim. This is enough to open a case. But it's not enough to win. He'll claim you gave him permission, which you did. We'll need to prove intent, that he used the money for himself, not for your benefit. Can you gather evidence of his lifestyle? Photos, witnesses, anything? Samuel grinned, a rare fire lighting his old eyes. Already started. Over the next few weeks, they collected everything. Pictures of Michael's new car, spotted outside expensive restaurants. Credit card statements showing luxury purchases. Even social media posts where Michael bragged about his hard-earned success. Each piece added weight to the growing case. But the deeper they dug, the more Richard realized Michael's betrayal went beyond money. He discovered that Michael had taken loans under Richard's name, using his father's credit to fuel his lavish lifestyle. The debt was piling up, and when it came crashing down, Richard would have been the one ruined. The betrayal cut deeper than ever, but it also sharpened Richard's resolve. One evening, Richard sat by Samuel's fireplace, papers spread across his lap. His voice cracked as he spoke. How did we get here, Samuel? We worked our whole lives for our children. We sacrificed, saved, endured. And now they treat us like burdens, like open wallets. Samuel stared into the flames. Because we never taught them where sacrifice ends and self-respect begins. We thought love meant giving everything. But love without wisdom turns into weakness. They didn't learn responsibility because we shielded them from it. And now, they think we owe them forever. Richard's hands shook. So what do I do when the time comes? How do I face him? Samuel turned to him, his eyes fierce despite his age. You don't face him as a victim. You face him as a man who still holds power. You let him know that fathers are not pawns, not banks, not shadows. You show him that even in old age you can fight back. Not with fists, but with truth. With proof. With the law on your side. That's how you reclaim your dignity. Richard nodded slowly. For the first time he felt something stirring inside. Not just anger, but strength. The plan was ready. The documents were gathered. Ellen was preparing the case. All that was left was the confrontation. The moment when Richard would look his son in the eye and force him to see the father he had betrayed. But little did Richard know Michael wasn't done scheming. And what came next would twist the knife even deeper before justice could finally be served. Before we continue, pause for a moment. If you are listening to this story, ask yourself, have you made your financial future safe? Have you given away control of your savings too soon, trusting someone else to protect it? Don't let betrayal teach you the hard way. Guard your independence. And if you've been through something like this, write your story in the comments. Others may learn from your experience. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the lessons hidden in these true stories. The night of the confrontation arrived like a storm that had been building for months. Richard didn't tell Michael he was coming. He wanted his son unprepared, stripped of excuses. Samuel drove him to the sleek apartment complex Michael now called home, an expensive glass tower gleaming against the city skyline. It was the kind of place Richard had never even dreamed of living, built on money that wasn't Michael's to spend. As they entered the lobby, Richard's cane tapped sharply against the polished floor. Each tap echoed like a drumbeat of justice approaching. The doorman glanced at them curiously but said nothing. Michael had put Richard's name on the guest list long ago, never expecting his father to use it against him. At Michael's door, Richard paused. His hand trembled as he lifted it to knock. Samuel placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Remember," he whispered, "you're not here to beg. You're here to remind him who raised him." The door swung open, and there stood Michael, his face momentarily frozen in shock before settling into a practiced smile. "Dad? What are you doing here? You should have called." Richard stepped inside without answering, his eyes scanning the lavish apartment. A leather sofa, a giant flat-screen TV, expensive art on the walls, all mocking him, each item a testament to his misplaced trust. Michael shut the door behind them. "You should be resting, Dad." "The hospital." Richard cut him off. "The hospital bill you promised to pay is still unpaid. They called me yesterday. Do you know what it feels like to lie in a bed, waiting for your son, only to realize he's abandoned you?" Michael's smile faltered, but he quickly masked it with false concern. "Dad, you're overthinking. I was busy with work. I meant to handle it." Samuel's voice thundered through the room, sharp despite his age. "Don't lie, Michael. We know where the money went. The car, the club membership, the loans in your father's name. We have everything. And soon, so will the court." Michael's face flushed red. He looked from Samuel to Richard, his eyes narrowing. "You went behind my back? After everything I've done for you?" Richard's cane struck the floor. "Everything you've done for me? You left me in a hospital bed to rot while you drove around in a car bought with my blood and sweat. That's not for me. That's theft. That's betrayal." Michael's mask cracked. His voice rose, dripping with venom. "You don't get it, do you? You worked your whole life for scraps. I'm the one who knows how to live. I'm building a future, and if I had to use your savings to get there, so be it. You should be proud I'm making something of myself." Richard's heart twisted. His son truly believed this. Pride was replaced by greed, respect by entitlement. "Proud?" Richard's voice shook, not from weakness but from rage. "Proud that you see me as a bank account? Proud that you think success built on betrayal is worth celebrating? No, Michael. Pride comes from sacrifice, from honor, from building a life without stepping on the very man who raised you." Samuel pulled a folder from his coat and dropped it on the coffee table. Documents spilled out, bank records, photos, receipts, credit statements. Michael's eyes widened. "This," Samuel said coldly, "is the truth, and it's going to court." Michael's bravado wavered. He picked up the papers, flipping through them quickly. "You wouldn't, you can't." Richard's voice hardened. "I can, and I will, unless you do exactly as I say." For the first time, Michael looked small in his expensive apartment, cornered by the truth. "What do you want?" he muttered. "I want my money back," Richard said firmly. "Every dollar you stole. I want those loans closed. I want proof in writing that you'll never touch another cent of my savings. And if you refuse, I'll let the law strip you of everything." Michael's jaw tightened. "And if I don't have it? Then the world will know what kind of man you are," Richard shot back. You'll lose more than money. You'll lose respect, reputation, and family. That's a price greed can't cover. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of an ornate clock on the wall. Michael sank onto the sofa, the arrogance draining from his face. For the first time he looked uncertain, like the boy Richard once raised. "You think this makes you strong," Michael whispered bitterly. "But you're just an old man clinging to pride." Richard leaned closer, his eyes fierce. "No, Michael. This makes me wise. And I'll tell you something you'll remember when I'm gone. A man who doesn't respect his father will never truly be respected by the world." Michael didn't respond. His silence was an admission, a crack in the armor he had built from arrogance and lies. That night, Richard and Samuel left the apartment with more than just evidence. They left with the upper hand. Michael had been exposed, and he knew it. Whether he returned the money willingly or was dragged into court, his power was broken. But the story wasn't over, because betrayal doesn't end the moment the truth comes out. It lingers, it poisons, it tests the soul of the betrayed. And Richard still had one more lesson to learn, and one more message to deliver, not just to Michael, but to every listener who had ever given too much and been left with too little. Take a breath here, my friend. If you're still with me, you've seen how betrayal can twist even family ties. But you've also seen how strength, planning, and wisdom can fight back. Don't hand over your life savings without safeguards. Don't let love blind you to responsibility. Protect what you've built. And if you face betrayal, share your story in the comments. Let others learn from your pain, and let your voice be heard. Michael didn't sleep that night. Neither did Richard. For Richard, sleep was replaced with the memory of his son's arrogance, the words echoing like a curse. "I'm the one who knows how to live. I'm building a future." For Michael, the silence of his apartment became unbearable. Every expensive thing around him felt tainted. The leather sofa, the designer watch on the counter, even the shiny car keys on the table, all bought with his father's sacrifice. They didn't look like success anymore. They looked like evidence. The next morning, Richard met Samuel and Ellen at the lawyer's office. Ellen spread the documents across her desk, her sharp eyes scanning each page again. "This is enough to start a case," she said. "But if we want to win outright, we'll need witnesses. Someone who can testify that Michael spent the money recklessly, not for your benefit." Samuel leaned back in his chair. "Witnesses won't be hard. His friends boast about him all over social media. Half the city has seen him flashing wealth he never earned." Ellen nodded. "Then it's settled. We'll file." Richard's stomach tightened. He had spent his life avoiding courtrooms, paying bills on time, living quietly, never making waves. But now, his own son had pushed him into a battle he couldn't ignore. 2 weeks later, Michael was served. The papers arrived at his door like a thunderclap. He crumpled them in his fists, rage boiling inside him. His phone buzzed with Samuel's name, but he ignored it. Then Richard's number appeared. Against his better judgment, Michael answered. "You really did it," Michael snapped. "You took your own son to court." "You took me to betrayal," Richard replied, his voice steady. "This is just the path you left me." Michael laughed bitterly. "You think a judge will believe you over me? I'll tell them you gave me everything freely, that you were confused, old, not in your right mind. Who do you think they'll believe? A sick old man or a son trying to care for him?" Richard's heart stung at the cruelty, but he didn't falter. "They'll believe the truth, and I'll show them who you really are." The weeks leading up to the trial were tense. Michael hired a flashy attorney, young and confident, who strutted into court as if the case were already won. He painted Michael as a dutiful son, a man unfairly accused by a bitter father influenced by outsiders. But Ellen was prepared. She stood tall, her gray hair pulled back neatly, her voice calm but cutting. Piece by piece, she dismantled Michael's story. "Mr. Michael Davis," she said in court, "can you explain why your father's retirement account shows payments to a luxury car dealership, when the stated purpose of the transfer was hospital expenses?" Michael shifted uncomfortably in the witness stand. I needed reliable transportation to take care of him." Ellen raised an eyebrow. A $75,000 sports car? That was for his hospital visits. The courtroom chuckled softly. The judge's gavel brought silence, but the damage was done. Next came the photos. Michael at expensive restaurants, glasses of champagne raised high. Michael flashing new watches on social media. Michael bragging about his grind, while his father lay in a hospital bed unpaid for. Richard watched from his seat, his chest tight. He wanted to cry, to shout, to ask his son why. But he held his silence, letting the truth speak louder than his pain. Michael's attorney tried to spin it. These are normal expenses for a man building his career. His father gave him the money willingly. Isn't that true, Mr. Davis? All eyes turned to Richard. He stood slowly, his cane steadying him. Yes, he said, his voice clear. I gave him the money because I trusted him, because I believed my son would care for me as I cared for him. But trust is not a license to steal. Love is not permission to betray. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Samuel later testified too, his cane tapping as he approached the stand. His voice shook, but his words were strong. This isn't just one father's story. It's the story of too many. Sons and daughters who see their parents' savings as theirs to waste. I know it because it happened to me too. We're here to say enough. Michael's face reddened. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about character, about the way the community now saw him. The trial stretched for days. Each morning Richard rose, dressed neatly, and faced the son who once ran to him as a boy for comfort. Each night he returned home, exhausted but resolute. On the final day, Ellen delivered her closing argument. This case is not about dollars. It is about dignity. A man gave his son everything, and his son abandoned him when he needed him most. If we excuse this, we tell every elder in this country their sacrifice means nothing. But if we hold Michael accountable, we send a message. Family is not an excuse for exploitation. The jury deliberated. Hours passed. Richard's heart pounded with each tick of the clock. Finally, they returned. The foreman stood. We find in favor of the plaintiff. Relief washed over Richard. Tears blurred his vision. Michael sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched, his world collapsing around him. The judge ordered restitution. Michael was to repay the funds, close the fraudulent loans, and face penalties for financial abuse. But the real punishment wasn't legal. It was the look Richard gave his son as he left the courtroom. Not a look of victory, but of finality. I loved you, Michael, Richard said softly as they passed in the hallway. But love without respect can't survive. I hope one day you understand what you've lost. Michael didn't reply. His eyes darted away, ashamed, perhaps even broken. Samuel walked beside Richard, his cane echoing in rhythm with Richard's steps. You did it, Samuel whispered. You showed him. You showed all of them. Richard nodded slowly. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt heavy, like a man who had carried a burden too long and finally set it down. But there was pride, too. Not in revenge, but in standing tall when it mattered most. That night, Richard sat by his window, the city lights glowing outside. He thought of the years he spent working double shifts, the nights he came home too tired to eat, the sacrifices he made so his son could have a better life. He thought of the betrayal, the courtroom, the verdict. And then he thought of the lesson. Not just for him, but for anyone who might hear his story. My friend, if you are listening, take this to heart. Betrayal can happen even within family. Love your children, yes, but guard your independence. Don't sign away your savings without safeguards. Don't let trust blind you to responsibility. Build a future where you are safe, even if the world around you changes. And if you've walked this road, if you've faced betrayal or had to fight for your dignity, share your story in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it. And if this story touched you, subscribe so you don't miss the lessons hidden in the lives of others. Because stories like Richard's aren't just stories. They are warnings. They are mirrors. And maybe, just maybe, they can change what comes next for you. The courtroom was silent when the judge leaned forward. Mr. Richard, after careful review of the evidence, It is clear that your son exploited your trust, neglected you in your time of need, and attempted to usurp your life savings. The court hereby grants you full control over your assets, authorizes restitution for damages, and issues an order of protection. David's jaw dropped. His wife gasped, clutching his arm. But Richard didn't look at them. He didn't need to. His eyes were fixed on the judge, then on the papers handed to him, his freedom, his justice, his dignity. Outside the courthouse, John clapped his father's shoulder. You did it, Dad. You not only took your life back, but you taught every man and woman sitting in that courtroom something powerful. Never let betrayal define your last chapter. Richard's voice trembled with relief. I thought saving money for my family would protect me. I never thought my family could be the ones to misuse it. But I've learned something, John. Saving is important, yes, but protecting those savings, managing them wisely, is survival. Because when your health fades, your financial wisdom has to stand guard for you. They walked past a group of older men and women who had been following the case. One of them, a gray-haired lady with tired eyes, approached Richard. Sir, your story. It's my story too. My son almost took advantage of me the same way. Thank you for fighting back. You gave me courage. Richard's chest tightened with gratitude. For the first time since the hospital incident, he felt useful again. His pain had turned into someone else's strength. Later that evening, as father and grandfather sat on the porch, the sunset painted the sky in gold. Richard finally allowed himself to breathe. John, promise me one thing. Don't just earn money. Learn to manage it. Protect it. Teach your children not just how to make a living, but how to make wise choices. Because money is only safe when guided by wisdom. John nodded. I promise, Dad. And I'll tell my children what happened here. I'll tell them that betrayal is possible even in families. But so is redemption. And that protecting what we've earned is as sacred as earning it. The story could have ended there, but Richard looked at the camera of his heart, as if speaking directly to every listener. My dear friends, if you've saved for retirement, protect it. Don't hand it over blindly, not even to those you trust most. Manage it, guide it, use it wisely. Betrayal may come uninvited, but preparation is your shield. And if you've faced betrayal in your own family, speak it. Share it, because silence only feeds the betrayal. A pause, a deep breath, and then softly but firmly, if this story touched you, write yours in the comments below. Tell us how you protected yourself or how you wish you had. Someone out there may need your wisdom more than you know. And before you go, subscribe to this channel, turn on the bell icon, and join me again. Because together, our stories can teach the world that wisdom doesn't just come with age. It comes with courage. The camera of imagination pulled back. The old father and his loyal son sat side by side, their silhouettes framed against the fading light. Betrayal had scarred them, yes, but financial wisdom, courage, and unbroken love had saved them. And that was the true ending.